The upcoming financial crisis will leave you with nothing but empty pockets. That's the bone-chilling prophecy by David Rogers Webb, a seasoned Wall Street insider and the author of the newly published book, The Great Taking. Your hard-earned money in the bank and your financial assets will become collateral in the next financial mess. That's the Great Taking. Webb spills the beans on how the laws are quietly changed to give secured creditors, think of certain big-shot banks, the legal thumbs up to grab your stocks, bonds, retirement account, and bank deposits. If you're up for a bit of financial fright night, grab a free copy of this financial horror tale at thegreattaking.com. Webb, who was once an asset manager with an impressive track record, paints the bleak picture of a worst-case scenario, a mass confiscation under the guise of a fabricated emergency, and supports his arguments with plenty of evidence, including snippets from the Federal Reserve and European Central Bank communications, references to the Universal Commercial Code, and quotes from laws and court cases, all pointing to an imminent financial crisis. If you think widespread confiscation of private assets is far-fetched, consider the events that unfolded in the United States in 1933. In March of that year, following a month of bank runs, President Roosevelt declared a nationwide bank holiday, temporarily closing the entire banking system. After a week, on March 13th, only specific banks chosen by the Federal Reserve were permitted to resume operations. Around 9,000 banks failed across the country, resulting in significant financial losses for depositors who had entrusted their funds to those banks. Despite the closures of the banks, the debts owed by the depositors were not forgiven. Instead, these obligations were transferred to the reopened banks. Those who couldn't meet their debt obligations lost their deposited funds and the assets they had financed through debt, including homes, cars, and businesses. Then, on April 5, 1933, President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 6102, effectively making it illegal for individuals to possess gold and requiring them to exchange their gold reserves for U.S. dollars. The confiscation of gold and currency reserves in 1933 was like the Great Taking 1.0, and Federal Reserve banks were the winners. Let's consider a more recent case, the banking crisis in the Mediterranean island nation of Cyprus. In 2012, Cypriot banks encountered substantial losses on their holdings of Greek government bonds, which were quite significant relative to the country's GDP. Seeking financial aid from international financial institutions, Cyprus was presented with a bailout deal that involved implementing a haircut on bank deposits. This essentially meant a percentage reduction in the value of deposits held in Cypriot banks, irrespective of whether they were insured or not. Understandably, this sparked public outrage. Due to immense pressure and concerns over potential precedents, the bailout terms were adjusted to exclude insured deposits up to €100,000. However, larger uninsured deposits still faced a significant loss of nearly 50%. Legally, the banks were authorized to use deposited funds for recapitalization, ensuring their solvency. Thus, the widespread closure of banks and the legal confiscation of bank deposits and gold reserves is not without precedent. Bank deposits, stocks, and bonds across various regions, including the US, Canada, and EU, can be considered IOUs. According to Webb, stocks and bonds undergo dematerialization, meaning they are digitized and transferred to international clearinghouses to serve as collateral during financial instability. How did we find ourselves in this situation? Webb says it all started in the US back in 1994 with the modification of the Uniform Commercial Code, UCC, across all 50 states, quietly and without the involvement of Congress. The traditional notion of owning securities as property was replaced by security entitlement after overhauling the UCC, transitioning securities to electronic holdings through dematerialization, and revising the bankruptcy laws in 2005. Webb provides an analogy to explain the horror of what could happen. consider purchasing a car with cash, believing you're being financially prudent by avoiding debt. However, unbeknownst to you, the dealer retains control over your car as collateral. This fact remains undisclosed. Moreover, the dealer utilizes your car and all other cars sold as collateral for their business borrowing. If the dealer declares bankruptcy, specific secured creditors gain the authority to seize your car and all previously sold vehicles without any judicial oversight, leaving you vulnerable to significant loss. Modifying bankruptcy laws, specifically incorporating safe harbor provisions, guarantees the absolute priority claim of secured creditors to client assets. This was evident in the Lehman Brothers brokerage bankruptcy case, where secured creditors were fully compensated while unsecured ordinary investors only received 41 cents on the dollar. Webb anticipates a significant financial crisis in the not-so-distant future, pointing to the historically low velocity of money, or VOM. VOM measures how frequently a currency unit changes hands to acquire goods and services within a designated period. This can be determined by dividing the gross domestic product, GDP, which denotes the total value of all goods and services procured, by the amount of money in circulation. A decrease in VOM signifies a decline in economic activity. And the VOM has been consistently declining since 1997. As of early 2024, it stands lower than any recorded point during significant historical events such as the Great Depression and World Wars. According to Webb, the diminishing velocity of money due to extensive money printing may lead to a significant financial crisis. This trend has historically foreshadowed major upheavals, including the collapse of significant empires in the 19th century, World War I, and the Great Depression. Webb believes the next financial crisis could be triggered by the asset-backed derivatives going bust, reminiscent of what happened in 2007 to 2008 with the collapse of mortgage-backed securities, MBS, and collateralized debt obligations, CDOs. A derivative gets its name because its value is derived from something else. To illustrate, consider a bet on the weather where we agree on a contract. If it's sunny, I pay you $1. If it's cloudy, you pay me $1. The contract itself isn't inherently valuable, but its worth becomes clear based on the weather outcome, either $1 or nothing. In financial markets, derivatives hinge on fluctuations in stock and bond values, mortgages, interest rates, currency exchange rates, and commodity prices. Warren Buffett has called derivatives financial weapons of mass destruction, and he was, as always, right. We got a taste of how lethal derivatives can potentially be in 2008, especially when they're used with high leverage. The Great Taking is about approaching that lethal point in financial markets in a not-so-distant future. According to the data from the Bank of International Settlements, BIS, often referred to as the central bank for central banks, the notional value of outstanding derivatives surpassed $715 trillion in mid-2023, with a gross market value exceeding $20 trillion. Imagine the havoc a $20 trillion pile could wreak when coupled with high leverage like the 30-to-1 ratio employed by Lehman Brothers in 2008. Keep in mind that the gross market value of all outstanding derivatives before the 2007 to 2008 financial crisis stood at $14.5 trillion, even less than the present value. How can you apply this knowledge practically? If you have the means to eliminate debt, do that. Investing in tangible assets like land, buildings, and farms could be a good hedge. In addition, keep some cash readily available and acquire physical gold. For those who like to stay invested, choosing brokerage firms insured by the Securities Investor Protection Corporation, SIPC, and keeping deposits in banks insured by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, are crucial. Otherwise, you run the risk of losing all your deposits or investments. Take, for instance, purchasing crypto through Coinbase. This poses a risk of complete loss in the event of bankruptcy. as Coinbase lacks FDIC insurance, and cryptocurrency isn't protected by or subject to the safeguards of FDIC or SIPC. What fig leaf will depositors have to protect them from the protected class? The FDIC's Deposit Insurance Fund, DIF, stood at $128.2 billion as of December 31, 2022. However, this fund can be depleted and has been entirely exhausted twice, during the savings and loan and global financial crises. In such instances, the FDIC was permitted to borrow funds from the Federal Financing Bank, holding a line of credit with the Treasury for up to $100 billion. Even if fully utilized, the total resources would be $228 billion, roughly 2% of insured deposits. In the scenario where a significant portion of the banking system faces insolvency, insured depositors would receive only 2 cents on the dollar. That will not go far in a widespread banking crisis, so there is no real fig leaf. I wish the Great Taking was just a conspiracy theory, but some of the insights are too deep and some of the documentation is too thorough to ignore. What do you think? Please share your comments, smash the like button, and consider subscribing. Until next time, may your dreams be free of financial nightmares.